So today's logic session and yesterday night's deals with the interdomain of pattern of the data organism, great paradigm within the Grecian banking collapse to 2020 wall, the outset of COVID. We logic all harmonic pattern of Bitcoin's creation non-organically, of course, a joint operation between 322 CIA, NSA, and Chinese intelligence for to act as a catcher of the money print that was print during COVID into what we see surgically in the four banks that received the liquidity dump, all surgical unified field pi centrifuge harmonics inherently outside of probability for not being pattern inherently, and also predictive foreknowledge of the event, all parties pinpointed specifically in the motion of logic. So it's logicked, probabilistic, impossible to not be intentional and surgically harmonic the hash rate of China of mining the Bitcoin network, about 80% of it, 75.5% ish. At the first presence, it reaches apex hash rate at the exact moment out of Wuhan, the same city where 5G, universal of Earth, infrastructure upgrade, and simultaneously a virus of a novelistic nature that since 1918 hasn't presented an international virus outbreak of such a nature. So the probability of both things occurring simultaneously and the hash rate uptick, three factors at the same time, is impossible. It's statistically impossible to happen without intentionality. And so we further inspect all facets going back to Bitcoin's creation and geopolitical and media's contagion 2011, mathematically surgical to Bitcoin's creation date. And then Abbott, Texas, the predictive exodus of Chinese Bitcoin miners that can't mine Bitcoin. You can't do anything of scale in China without explicit permission from Chinese intelligence or banking cartel, literally the centrifuge rather, for such an operation as mining Bitcoin in China at scale, right? You just can't do anything without being a complete cronyism complex inherently. And so in the logic motion is, of course, they have predictive foreknowledge of regulatory incoming for the 2020 shutting down of Bitcoin being able to be mined in China, and have already predictively for 3 years. Abbott visits China in 2017 and then starts setting up, for their exodus predictively. That does occur in a surgical, mathematical, harmonic continuum. In the pattern that's already been achieved and pinpointed past probability of being, a circuited data organism that the general fluid dynamic manifold of all parties pinpointed are following like a blueprint. And so the bill in Texas is 4474. 444 divided by 7 is 63 non-terminus under 64 hexagrams I Ching pattern. That's not random. Any number of other patterns are preposterously surgical to the 3114/70/7 Mayan and I Ching pattern lattice superimposition, as well as any number of 11/7 interdomain patterns within the complex since Grecian banking, BTC formulation, COVID, first date. We use the first Tennessee banking change to first horizon, which is necessarily a blue left star, eastern star, no longer first Tennessee, America first, now a Chinese bank in your face. And so that happened surgically right before the first case of COVID and any number of other things connotated. But, and then, after so much an amount of, surgical past any probability of not being a cooperative data organism from the outset of Bitcoin to COVID we pinpoint On the NIH website, I think it's over, well, it's probably 10, 15, 20 times or more L-cysteine, studied for any number of things back to late 1980s to 5 minutes ago, for viral application. So L-cysteine is a sub $5 application, and any ER available necessarily internationally could be, maybe, or is already present, combined with a corticosteroid or anti-inflammatory for a full spectrum treatment protocol on the day available and known to exist, probabilistically past impossible to not know it exists because it's on your own database that you just say, hey, we're having a virus outbreak, NIH, Fauci or other. Let's scan our own database for known treatment protocols for this that are completely eradicative and already available and cheap. We can just use the Defense Production Act. No? Okay. And then why not? And then 7 million dead. So we logic how many people would have been saved if the Defense Production Act was used to manufacture L-cysteine. And any ER has atypical anti-inflammatory or corticosteroid to combine for a 67% plausible less death print international. That's 4.8 million people that died because of a monetized eugenical inherent foreknowledge methodical intent vector to kill them with a synthetic virus. So 5G is not random and not necessarily logicked in this. Graphene manufacturers. So simultaneously as SARS, synthetic, graphene, nanite, surgical masks outside of any efficacy for a virus prevention. Massively available and no N95s that would necessarily be efficacious. That's because they're made with graphene. So graphene-based nanite makes its way for receptor sites and elaborates passive conditioning from AI sorted fees on prismatic and Chinese social credit system, data systems, international. So this close, dense mesh network that's not necessary because we have direct-to-sat low latency phones already existent in technology for use. Why don't we go to those? No? Control schema. And this added very Orwellian, I agree, Kafkaskian application of weirdo technology for control schema and herding elaboration to make complexly autonomic more so the general mass populace. Herding, right? So the graphene-based nanite makes its way for the receptor sites, responsible for, dopaminergic signaling, adding a Pavlovian shock to the passive conditioning vector increases the efficacy of seeding of equivalency faults through AI feed sorts. So, responds to, like a malarial parasite, and why anti-malarials work, like hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, outside of any explanation for why they would work case to case. Because it's a dual factor split narrative occurring, not just one thing. So L-cysteine, necessarily in raw chewed garlic, which is much more effective in 69 cents, not $4.84 trillion, or 6.27 total, 69 cents a piece. Very cheap, and under $5 L-cysteine. So, both NERS, nanite uptake rejection syndrome, and SARS, both respond to being deleted by the presence of a mass presence of allicin complex or L-cysteine. Allicin in raw chewed sublingual, invariably, the AI only has populist reductionist science experiment assertion on top of data that it first consults. So of course when you're raw chewing garlic and releasing allicin, pseudo L-cysteine in the same and much more effective in a complex entourage's assembly, you are invariably sublingually absorbing and bypassing digestion time dilation. So that's very important. It goes straight into your bloodstream invariably and deletes the virus and or the graphene-based nanite unilaterally. So being that that's ignored, it's logic, very basic logic, it's an intentional death exercise and money simultaneously. So that we call that monetized eugenics. And And then out of that pattern pinpointed, we go back to scanning history that we've already scanned massively from 1860 to, with the fulcrum at 1914 to 2020, and find a preposterous centrifuge data organism pattern on. We limited the overhead per 4 epochs within the interdomain of that 1860 to 2020 to 22 individuals, because we don't need a massive list to start with. As centrifuge macro nodes within the data organism complex of very circuited, outside of any probability to not be inherently circuited and following a blueprint of pattern continuum, past impossible. It simply cannot be the pattern since 1860 to 2020 without being intentional to a specific pattern followed, rather than by happenstance, organic behavior continuum. And so from this, we go to, we've already done this, interdomain of market fluctuation from, I did a scan from 629 to predicting market stock prices of 22 stocks within the Fortune 500 and any number of commodity prices. What would they be on 722? And so we relogic that with the new pattern we found inherent to the epochs inspected with the COVID pattern interdomain and probability tuples in tow, and then did a relogic. We did scan to March of this year, interdomain of the day, since 629 to 711 today. Pointedly 11 over 7 is one of those inherent patterns. Isn't that interesting? So we then do a predictive analysis of what all those 22 stocks and commodities in question price would be from 7, 11, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 20, 21st, and 22nd in a nice, neat little table. And then we'll see on the 22nd, for this data science exercise, whether we were right, whether we were wrong. And then we'll lather, rinse, repeat this intermittently through this logic continuum as time goes on to see how correct we can get market prediction down to an exact science. So let's see what else. After that, we then back scanned the entire logic session up till now for what raw earth and commodities generalistically would be affected by this upper Fermi filter technology unveiling and unrolling and starting to be manufactured over the next 3 years. The electromagnetogravnetic harmonic convergent energy reactor, the new perspective compute architecture, and any number of the other anti-grav devices, EM laser technology, etc., that all require mercury, amalgamate, metals, casings, magnets, any number of other things, exotic and atypical of a specific kind or whatever. And we logic what their price is today, what their price would plausibly be in 3 years of production on all this next-gen upper Fermi filter technology was to start taking place today, which I imagine it already is in certain facets of high-rotating macro, friendlies to the United States for defense purposes, as we like to get out ahead of things, right? So that's the end of the logic session today. It's 6:43. I said I was going to do every 3 days, but I felt, this needed a deep dive introduction, descriptor, and segmented from the others, as COVID's kind of the marked, preposterous, BTC Grecian banking collapse to, we didn't do the market collapse, housing market collapse, because that's too far out necessarily. There's an interdomain pattern from 2015 to 2020 that's preposterous that needed to be pinpointed and descriptored, and all interdomain logic regarding COVID that you ever wanted to know, that you won't hear from brass atypical unless their hand is held to the fire, which it is. Hi. Upper Fermi filter, antediluvian return cinnabar miner, upper Fermi filter ships with harmonic weaponry from anti-de Sitter space, and surgical biodemo, viral, to synthetic genetics. So the square is in for everyone. So if you don't do proper illumination or legal recourse on the, very viscerally unwilling to change to the new paradigm tuples with your power and regulatory or intelligence government, well, you'll get selective interest. Selective interest of the big stick, that walks softly here. So keep that in mind, persons watching. There's going to be no more monetized eugenical exercises on a macro scale, no more intentional death prints of what it essentially was its harmonic age marker selective attacking that synthetic virus. So intentionally killing elders over the age of 65-year-olds with pre-existing conditions that freed up capital that was then dumped into crypto, and lather, rinse, repeat, cycled 4.84 trillion that we didn't logic this in this session, but you can just do your own study. Right before this went off in 2019, Congressers like to try to reallocate the Social Security slush fund for all these retired seniors that would be dead soon, that they knew would be dead soon. And so who cares? They won't need this money. Well, I care, regardless of me having a extraterrestrial endeavor, novelistic from your atypical, word salad dissident, which I am not. I'm the square, to reconfirm myself as proxy. It's I think so. And so, if you have any questions about any step of the motion of this, it's a soft hand at all vectors and a hard hand if non-compliant and turn to new paradigm, which is a slow transmutation of the energy paradigm, propulsion paradigm, and mooting monetized eugenical complex in pharma, food, and all facets of its nefarious intent vector, the data organism, and medias, control of medias, and rebooting a organic zeitgeist out of what is a centrifuge filtered and controlled communication sphere that helped to print a 7 million death print on purpose through filtration. So before I end, it's a personal story. In 2020, in March, grandfather was at Baptist East, where it was $46,000 to run a specificity test for COVID. He plausibly had and someone else did, but they couldn't run the test even, and it was $46K. At the same time, you'll see this logic in the feed, it was $15 to run a specificity test in China. Why? Because they made the virus, and so they have testing kits ready to go very cheaply and manufactured already. So, in July, my father, he's 322 CIA downchain Fred Smith. 322 CIA Bitcoin equals CCP, oil and gas and aviation. Halliburton equals CCP, oil and gas and aviation. It's not a difficult equation there. Perceives that Prism, on Facebook, my top post. I get in an argument with a person named Dina Leffert, who uses a stereotypical scripted response to my experiencing cognitive dissonance against the COVID narrative generalistically. And in the litany, I say a specific full entourageous eradicatory complex that includes raw chewed garlic, cannabis, it's a corticosteroid plus anti-inflammatory, L-arginine, and massive dose vitamin C, a non-toxic full entourageous eradicative assembly that would have saved 4.8 million lives, theoretical, and being that raw chewed garlic, much more effective, probably more. So, when I post that in July, my father motions of fake legal, conjured, motion to have me evicted from a family home I lived in for 20 years. For 20 years with no issue. And then all of a sudden, there's an interfamilial issue that comes out of nowhere that I'm not aware of. It's because in July I said on Facebook, and my pinned post remains, I'm trying to save 7 million people. This is on the NIH website. Do your own research. So the basic logic is you have your own database.
No, this is good. No.
It's on the NIH website. Why don't you scan your own database for 5 seconds? So that's the basic foundational logic. It's already on there. Ignored. Known about. Ignored. When someone said it, I'm not the Forsythia guy, though I am the Forsythia guy. Does that make sense? So that's why we can include Contagion 2010 at the Bitcoin creation date harmonic that's surgically and mathematically harmonically patterned in the data organism general fluid dynamic manifold centrifuge pattern from Greece to COVID. It's beyond any probability of being random, of course. So Forsythia is anything outside of a dictated mandate by WHO. It's conditioned in the straw man Jude law, Semite, Hispanic, Africano, Asiatic. This is the synthetic genetics. Jude law, Borla, Epstein, Mossad. You get it? Judeo law imposing on you fake narrative bad medicine, and you die. And he's the straw man for the Forsythia equals L-cysteine. I just drew you a map. So that's the intro to today's and yesterday's session. Deep dive study. So an extra note here is it's very pointed. When I pointed out the pattern was on 629, right? And so whenever you point out pattern in general fluid dynamic market fluctuation, it's like a rat's nest of trading bots, centrifuge pattern. This is more of a general fluid dynamic macro data organism pattern past a specific interdomain pattern of bot trading. So regardless, the pattern centrifuge can't necessarily change if operating on a general fluid dynamic harmonic manifold that's been operating since 1860 to now. So inherently, this is how, a data organism is very weak and easily deleted by upper Fermi filter with perspective compute, 1.5 terahertz per core, 46.8 million times faster data center per data center, and cluster of 216, 10.1 billion times faster. With the centrifuge pattern in target, it's very easily deleted. So this is optical formality necessarily. But, it will change its pattern when pinpointed interdomain of, say, small epochs pattern. Because people start trading off of the pinpointed pattern interdomain of a small epoch, and so it, transmutates itself necessarily. But it can only do that within a given construct domain of available centrifuge general fluid dynamic manifold pattern, which all pinpointed, it has nowhere to go but inside its own box of self. So keep that in mind. And all this is being pinpointed for forward curation, custom data set for AI training on proper neural net formulation that even interdomain of existent compute architecture is a 95 times multiplier on efficiency functionality. So that's interesting.
Okay.
So the perspective compute architecture with proper neural net formulation with custom data sets free of any bad history or bad imposed physics maths, and the centrifuge general fluid dynamic manifold of it in concurrent market fluctuation unprints it very rapidly. See the other logic session regarding exactly how long prospective computer architecture tasked with high-frequency trading could delete the data organism from existing in the market fluctuation, as well as deleting the U.S. national debt. It's preposterously and comically a short amount of time, within a 90-day period. Within a 90-day period. Isn't that interesting? So that's the power of technology. Have a nice day.